I'd like to start with the poem that Al cited. In fact, it's a poem for a young poet, because I know there are a lot of young poets in this room, in fact. Most people search all of their lives for some place to belong to, as you said, but I look instead into the eyes of anyone who talks to me. I search for a face to believe and belong to, a loosening mask with a voice, ears, and a consciousness breathing through a nose I can see. Day to day, it's the only way I like to travel, noticing the colors of a cheek, the curvature of brow, and the public declarations of two lips. Okay, I did not say male or female. I did not say Serbian or Tutsi. I said what tilts my head into the opposite of fear or dread is anyone who talks to me. A face to claim or question my next step away, or else towards mask with a voice, 15 anemones, and a conscience breathing through a nose I can see. Such an open day to day, it's the only way I like to travel. Forever begs, noticing the colors of a cheek, the curvature of brow, and the bird and the public and declarations of two lips. Blending invitation. Okay. Approach, or else my agonized reproach, to strangulations of the soul that bring a mother to disown her children, leaving them alone to feed on bone and dust. A face despite a corpse invasion of the cradle where I rock my love alive. A face despite numb fashions of an internet connection between nobody and no one. A face against the narcoleptic antiseptic chalk streaks in the sky that lie and posit credit cards and starched de facto exposés as copacetic evidence that you and I need no defense against latrine and bulletproof decisions launched by limousines, dividing up the big screen into gold points cold above the valley of the shadow of unpardonable, tiny, this breathing and that breath, and then that and that death. I search a face, a loosening mask with voice, ears, and a consciousness breathing through a nose that I can see. I search a face for obstacles to genocide. I search beyond the dead, and driven by imperfect visions of the living, yes and no, I come and go back to the eyes of anyone who talks to me.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience as we work through the glitches of trying to live stream and also, get the logistics in order to make this all happen. Good afternoon from the East Coast. That's where many of us are. My name is Maryam Ivette Parhizkar. I'm the facilitator of today's event on behalf of Conor Tomás Reed, Talia, Shalev, Wendy'sSubway, and the students of the Yale University Ethnicity, Race, and Migration course, Ethnic Studies and the Social Imagination. Welcome to Activating June Jordan's Life Studies, Notes, Conversation, and Workshop. A reminder that many of us are tuning in from the still unceded territory of the Lenape people and others from the still unceded territory of the Quinnipiac people. I'm mindful that this acknowledgement is only a recognition, and that recognition should ultimately move us toward action alongside the long ongoing struggles for Indigenous sovereignty on colonized land. Need to be named, as we all but emerge out of the cloud of election season within US empire, we hope that this event instigates imaginative work beyond the limits circumscribed by it. And that by thinking with the lessons of June Jordan's work and legacy in the present, it nudges us toward one possible set of strategies. This event is part of Conor's residency at Wendy'sSubway titled Radiating Black and Puerto Rican Feminist Studies from the City University of New York to the Americas and the Caribbean. I thank Sunny Iyer and Rachel Valinsky and others from Wendy'sSubway team for their support today, including live closed captioning. Please look in the chat window for a link in which you can access that. I also ask that you keep your microphones muted unless requested. I'm also very honored to welcome you all to this event as an extremely expanded version of the seminar, Ethnic Studies in the Social Imagination, supported by the Ethnicity, Race, and Migration program at Yale University, where I teach and study. As an alumna of the CUNY Graduate Center, where Talia and Conor were my comrades and colleagues and still are, I'm glad to be able to build this bridge. So thank you to Alicia Schmidt Camacho, Zarina Graywall, and Tatiana Sisija for their support in making this happen. Thank you to everyone who helped spread the word, especially the CUNY Center for Humanities. And thank you to the students, John Ago, Martina Amate Perez, Cassidy Arrington, Kendall Donaldson, Kathy Duong, Lauren Lee, Larissa Martinez, Irene Vasquez, Isaac Yearwood, and Jessica Yu for being so game to opening up our classroom in this way. And thank you, June Jordan, for being why we come into this living room today. Though first and foremost, she identified her profession as poet, as she mentions in a piece from the Life Studies chapbook around which this event is organized. She was also a teacher, a pedagogical activist, an urban researcher, an advocate for children, Black people, and others of the third world, for Black language. And of course, so much of that work is rooted in her early commitment to Black and Puerto Rican communities in New York City, especially young people in New York City public grade schools and at the City University of New York. We began our class this semester by talking about the genealogy of ethnic studies and how in its institutional history, which as student Jessica Yu recalled yesterday, came as a compromise with the revolutionary project of third world studies in the 1960s. And in that, it can be easy to decenter, I mean, in what ethnic studies is, it can be easy to decenter the imagination as a really serious site of transformative social practice. And it's not just a thing of study, right? It's also a source of method. Poesis, the root for poetics and poetry, is at the most simple meaning the act of making. It is a source of method. What is it that we can learn from those who model that in their work? Our learning together has centered the work of creative theorists, activists, artists and writers, especially poets and people who overlap across those things, those identities. People who transfigure how we imagine society in relation and community. Our theme for this week has been the workshop in relation to the collective. Some students have been meditating on Jordan's commitment to children in the workshops that she cultivated, and especially how June Jordan values affirmation of the individual, and that's her phrase, through poetry. Referencing a collaborative writing practice that Jordan used with her students, as mentioned in the 1969 speech, Children and the Hungering For. Student Martina Amate Perez reflects, quote, "It made me wonder how this method of collaborative writing could both adhere to and contradict the individual and private nature that poetry often necessitates. It also made me think about how special this method for young students might be, how the union of voices and the fusing of ideas, stories, wishes, desires can tap into an even deeper range of possibility with poetry," end quote. I will let the presentation and conversation of today's event carry answers, but it is as much a question for how it may shape the young as well as all of us here right now. I mean, and that's who's not to say that we are not all young in some way. How can the force of poetry, however explicit or implicit, bring us together? I will give student Isaac Yearwood, who cites classmates Cassidy Arrington in his comments, the last word in my remarks. And this is Isaac's quote. "When June Jordan speaks of poetry as the gateway out of isolation, and Cassidy lets us know words cover her at 3 a.m., and writer Dion Brand favors a book above all else when sleeplessness takes over, we see why words scare the powers that don't be you and me. In On Totalitarianism, Hannah Arendt speaks of isolation as the primary tool of the tyrannical. It's a work of oppressive art that the world's model for democracy can run a pseudo-totalitarian regime on millions of its inhabitants without serious repercussions. But on the topic of isolation, poetry and words render such a mission impossible. When we read, we're being spoken to. When we write, we're communicating with. We don't know who or when our words will reach, but the mere fact that they can put us in community. And as that community is undefined, it is limitless. Words then render us all powerful. Now, isn't that a scary sight for the powers that be, especially at 3 a.m. when we're supposed to feel most alone? So thank you for that, Isaac. I will now read the bios of today's guests, and then I will let two of the students bring June Jordan's voice into the room. Conor Tomás Reed is a Puerto Rican Irish multi-gendered street scholar and freedom maker who teaches Africana Studies and American Studies at Brooklyn College. Conor is a contributing editor with Lapis Journal and Lost and Found, the CUNY Poetics Document Initiative, and a participant in Free CUNY and Rank and File Action, or RAFA. Conor is developing a book about the rise of Black Puerto Rican and women's studies and movements at the City College of New York and in New York City from 1960 to the present. This event is part of Conor's November through January residency entitled Radiating Black Puerto Rican Feminist Studies from CUNY to the Americas and the Caribbean with the Brooklyn Community Center Wendy'sSubway. Talia Shalev is a teacher, scholar, and poet. She is co-editor with Conor of June Jordan's Life Studies 1966 through 76, and Adrienne Rich, Teaching at CUNY 1968 through 74, both published through Lost and Found. Her writing appears in the Seattle Review, the Volta, Cream City Review, and Women's Studies and Interdisciplinary Journal. Talia teaches as a lecturer at the Stevens Institute of Technology and holds a PhD in English from the CUNY Graduate Center. Her current research project is Some Inarticulate Major Premise, Poetry, the Will of the People, and the US Supreme Court. So thank you, everyone. I will now pass the mic to Kendall Donaldson and Irene Vasquez, who will read from June Jordan's 1970 graduation speech to middle schoolers at Ocean Hill, Brownsville in Brooklyn, IS 55. Conor will tell us some more about that. They will be followed by Conor and Talia's presentations with slides, about 20-ish minutes of discussion, and then a workshop component, including a writing activity and some interaction. So Kendall, you can take it from here.
I am calling for our own people power. Garbage burned in the street a few days ago here in Ocean Hill because a garbage truck is a political machine. We must make ourselves into a community machine that will eliminate and throw out their political machinery. What we have to do right now is to create community machines that will collect our garbage, control our schools, and patrol our streets for our safety and not our persecution. We must no longer wait for somebody to remember us, and then, maybe, to send a garbage truck to pick up the garbage. We must no longer wait for somebody to maybe understand our history, and then to maybe teach our children the truth. We must no longer simply tremble when we hear the gunfire of police or state troopers or the National Guard. We must take control. We must protect our once only lives. We have to take apart and then replace the whole political life that has proven deadly to our own lives. We have to build a living structure of our own true human community. In the deepest sense, community is not political. A community is a social environment, making plain one common purpose, the happy advancement of all who live within the community. So we are talking about parents and children, uncles and aunts, grandmothers, teachers, and students who can come together as a deliberate social community of people who shall be safe and who shall grow strong and who shall prosper because they do truly belong to the same community. Look to the community of Fayette, Mississippi. Look to the community of Newark, New Jersey, where the people have put forth a good man and a Black man as mayor at least. And to you, young graduates, I say the same. Please, look ahead. Don't drop out of high school. Change the high school. Make the high school your own life-preserving community. It's your high school. People force you to sit there at least until you are 16 years old, at least. All right, turn it around. Since you were compelled to attend high school, then compel that school to serve your life. Serve to enable and to ennoble your life so that you can defend it, and so that you will have a life you can follow and share proudly. Go through high school. Don't turn off. Take it over. Don't drop out. Change it. Let us insist that life studies, that Black studies, that urban studies become the central parts of the curriculum right now. For what is the purpose of a school if it will not prepare you to live your own life of your own choosing in the community of your choice?
Let us raise up people power versus political power. Let us build schools into our community machine that will eliminate the old political machines, those old political machines that ignore communities of people, or else burn down villages of people, or else starve families of people, or else murder the children of our communities. It is right that we meet here, in a holy place of prayer to honor our children. We want you to know that we recognize your lives as holy lives. We consecrate our own lives to your survival and to your perpetual freedom. We pledge that we will work and pray and talk and plan together for the support of your hopes, that you will live to be 14, 15, 16, 65, and 90 years old. Till the whiplash helmets go and take away that cream and orange Chevrolet, stripped the inside steel and parked forever on one wheel. Set the wild dogs chewing up that pitiful capitulation, plastic flower, plastic draperies to dust the dirt. Break the clothesline, topple down the clothesline pole. Oh, my lives among the wounded buildings should be dressed in trees and grass. I salute you, my brothers and sisters. Be strong, be beautiful, and be free. We salute you, the sons and the daughters of our hearts and our pride. Congratulations.
Wow, that was incredible. Kindle and Irene, thank you so much for bringing June's words into our time together. If y'all will give me just one moment, I'm going to share my screen to show some images. So I want to share a tremendous gratitude to Maryam Parhizkar and Talia Shalev for joining me in conversation. Also to the group at Yale that invited us very generously into your class to be able to think alongside June Jordan and each other today. Also to Rachel Walensky and Sunny Ayer with the Wendy'sSubway crew. Also the crew of people at the City University of New York's Graduate Center who created chapbooks on the teaching archives of Tony Cade Bombara, June Jordan, Audre Lorde, Adrienne Rich, in particular friends Miriam Atkin, Imanja Brown, and Kiba Lavon. And I also want to share gratitude to you all for coming here today, for building together. I definitely want to affirm at the beginning that what I'll be presenting is building upon the work of many extraordinary scholars and theorists of the New York City, but also around the country and around the world. I encourage you to screenshot this community recognition and to build 150 study groups that can bloom coming out of this. So this presentation builds upon these people's work and also in particular the movement work of millions whose actions and ideas animated the stories that I'm going to be telling today. Okay. June Jordan's immersive radical pedagogy was formed during the early 1960s in New York City, where she was born in Harlem in 1936 and raised in Brooklyn. In early 1960s Harlem, she regularly conversed with Malcolm X and members of the Congress of Racial Equality. She frequented trips to the public library and documented the July 1964 Harlem riots firsthand. Jordan's early writings show an engagement with the themes of housing, urban conditions, and youth that served as prisms of social inequities in much of Black and Puerto Rican literature in the post-World War II period. In 1966, as debates mounted over the continued racial and economic segregation of New York City's public schools and neighborhoods, Jordan began to work as a central analyst and ghostwriter with the community action program Mobilization for Youth. In essays like A Brief History of the Lower East Side and The Determining Slum, Jordan shows how landlords and city officials intentionally created squalid living quarters to disempower residents, particularly Black and Puerto Rican, and also German, Irish, Italian, and Russian, and how their proposed grassroots alternatives were repeatedly ignored. Jordan writes in The Determining Slum, "The survival of the poor and the survival of the slum, the necessary continuing use of inadequate shelter, depend on the preservation of human and environmental failure. The poor cannot disappear and the slum cannot be demolished. Crowding is a factor commonly associated with slum life. Liberation from crowded living quarters usually implies the street. The street functions as cradle, school, and the opportunity for an extended kinship system. Even though the essay's conclusions about the inevitable stasis of the poor reveals Jordan's own doubts at the time on the collective capacity for change, she notably refers to the street and its publics in ecological and pedagogical terms. As Jordan embarked on a teaching career that would carry through the next 3 decades, she would articulate a resistance to deterministic conclusions in her poetry, essays, and speeches. When Jordan began to teach writing at the City College of New York in 1967 at the age of 31, she brought to the bustling campus milieu this understanding of urban policies and neighborhood rebellions. She taught in the SEEK, or Search for Education, Elevation, and Knowledge program, alongside such luminaries as Tony Cade Bambara, David Henderson, Audre Lorde, Adrienne Rich, and many others, to expressly work with a cohort of Black and Puerto Rican students in a predominantly working to middle class Euro-descended institution. Jordan questions how it could be indeed called a city college in the center of Harlem if only 5% of its students were Black and brown. Now, during this time at New York City public school districts such as Ocean Hill, Brownsville, and Brooklyn, advocates began to demand community control of the majority Black and Puerto Rican schools, including a role to hire and fire teachers and principals, and to center Black and Puerto Rican studies. As these demands gained momentum in 1968, the mostly Euro-descended United Federation of Teachers union chose to go on strike against them. Undeterred, parents, students, and some UFT teachers defied this racist strike and assembled pop-up freedom schools to practice what they sought to formally institutionalize. Ultimately, this neighborhood coalition was actually given control of the school district as part of an experimental school decentralization program. The following spring at City College, a Black and Puerto Rican student-led campaign demanded the creation of a School of Third World Studies for incoming students to proportionally reflect the Black, Puerto Rican, and Asian high school student population of the city and other systemic changes. In April 1969, they occupied multiple campus buildings to create Harlem University for 2 weeks. This free college, suddenly under neighborhood control, hosted a walk-in clinic, free breakfast and daycare, and community education classes. The entire faculty in the SEEK program, including Jordan, mentored the student activists and supported the strike. Jordan chronicled at the time, quote, "In every sense, from faculty petitions to student manifestos to the atmosphere in the cafeteria and the bathrooms, City College signified a revolution in progress. Nobody was eating, sleeping, thinking, or moving around anything except the issues at stake," end quote. During and after the strike, Jordan seriously engaged with the students' demands, taking their compositions as seriously as she had in her youth literacy programs, which Talia will be speaking about in a bit. These themes would appear in Jordan's landmark 1969 essay, Black Studies, Bringing Back the Person, printed in Evergreen Review. This first major published document on Black studies by a Black woman educator at the time circulated lessons from the City College rebellion to a broad countercultural audience. Seen alongside the CUNY interventions of her colleagues Tony Cade Bambara, Barbara Christian, Audre Lorde, this resituates our sense of the long arc of Black women's studies and Third World women's studies to include the late 1960s in Harlem, and then into the mid-1970s with the Combahee River Collective, and the early 80s with anthologies such as And Some of Us Were Brave, and This Bridge Called My Back, for examples. Jordan directly addresses the strike demands that had emerged from the pedagogies of the SEEK program, admiring the far-reaching implications of the solidarity bridge between present and future City College students. She proclaims, quote, "Black and Puerto Rican students at the City College insist upon community. Serving the positive implications of Black studies, life studies, students everywhere must insist on new college admissions policies that will guide and accelerate necessary radical change at all levels of education," end quote. The City College strike galvanized a wave of protests across the CUNY system and ultimately opened its doors wide to desegregate admissions and create Black, Puerto Rican, Asian, and women's studies departments and programs. So too did its participants work to boomerang the strike's perspectives outward across the city. Their focus on pedagogies, creative arts, and public policies across the education system and the city's 5 boroughs manifested a much larger freedom school strategy that spans the entire city. To help do this, Jordan oriented back to Ocean Hill-Brownsville. In June 1970, she delivered a graduation speech poem to IS 55 middle school students, which you heard a little bit earlier with Kendall and Irene. In a call to transform public schooling and public life, she urges the graduating students, quote, "I hope that you will insist that your studies shall become life studies, Black studies, urban studies, environmental studies. The American evidence of contempt for our Afro-American lives can easily be seen when you realize we who are Black, and we who live in urban centers of the country, and we who poison ourselves simply by breathing the air, and we who swallow soap and worms, and worse than that, when we drink a glass of water, we cannot come into any classroom and learn what we need to know." Jordan's words resonated in an imperiled context. At this time, the high schools these students would enter had as much as a 65% dropout rate. When Jordan beckons these young students to demand Black studies as part of life studies, her words resonate in the immediate context of a movement for community control of education in the entire city. Jordan offers multiple interventions with his Black Studies, Life Studies framework. Black Studies can't just be seen as an elective part of the kindergarten through PhD curriculum, or relegated only to the fields of humanities and social sciences, but must be seen as central to the study of all human and ecosystemic experiences. Life Studies requires going beyond the spaces of formal learning to the street, the living room, the library, the riot, the liberated college building, to expand the sense of where and how study happens. It also requires that spaces of learning be fundamentally life-nourishing, life-extending. While the development of Black studies is often associated with movements in and around universities, in Jordan's speech, we see that the urgency and relevance of Black studies as life studies is rooted in her particularly Black feminist advocacy for youth learning that attends to urban design and its environmental costs. Jordan's foresight prepared her to address these students who she and the City College strikers sought to one day welcome into CUNY classrooms. The same year in 1970, the CUNY administration ushered in open admissions, allowing every New York City high school graduate entrance into CUNY's 2- and 4-year colleges. This historic policy would be replicated in public schools nationwide, but faced immediate backlash at home. Conservative faculty and media crafted a racist elitist discourse on, quote, "the death of the university," end quote, alleging that open admissions only benefited poor Black and brown students at the expense of CUNY standards, which, of course, detracted attention away from the administration's deep gutting of the budget. As Jordan understood from her housing advocacy days, the long-practiced urban policy of maintaining overcrowded and under-resourced slums in New York City became a model for forcibly overcrowding and underfunding CUNY after open admissions. Within 7 years, the almost all Euro-descended student body had become a majority of students of colors, which was exactly when CUNY decided to impose universal tuition. In a May 5th, 1976 statement at a CUNY board hearing, Jordan expressed outrage as one of 13 City College professors on hunger strike to demand that CUNY remain free. Applying her analyses from a decade earlier, she lauds CUNY's historic access to poor European immigrant students, but decries that once Black and Puerto Rican students began to enter the university in larger numbers, free education was suddenly imperiled. Jordan frames the imposition of tuition and the threat to truly open admissions in terms of survival, in which implicitly life studies is endangered. She stated, "We cannot accept the death of this great free university because we cannot accept the death of the spirit, the death of the aspirations, the death of the future that will surely follow for our children, our students. Racism means hatred, means death, unless we resist. We will fast, we will take a cut in salary, we will fight. The possibility that we may lose is not a possibility. We have to win. We call upon all of the people of the city of New York to join with us on behalf of all of the children and all of the students of the city of New York to resist this death, end quote. The fall 1976 imposition of tuition at CUNY occurred with massive layoffs of many of the faculty who had helped to usher in open admissions, including Jordan for one semester. CUNY and New York City suffered economic shock therapy that would soon bend the nation's cities and colleges towards privatization and sharpened inequalities. Jordan briefly stayed at CUNY before continuing on to SUNY Stony Brook and then to UC Berkeley to lead the Poetry for the People program until her passing in 2002. June Jordan's experiences across these mid-1960s to mid-1970s upheavals illustrate how insurgent Black feminist teaching and learning methods could blossom at this particular conjuncture in New York City, and why the political and educational elite fought so intensely to counteract them. Jordan's legacy shows us how she prepared her students, co-teachers, and neighbors in strategic moments of their becoming to engage in structural analyses, wage rigorous critiques of their schools and neighborhoods, and take powerful risks together to change them. Thank you, everyone, and I'll kick it to Talia.
Thanks so much, Conor. Thank you to Maryam Parhizkar and the students of Ethnic Studies and the Social Imagination for having us here. I'm really moved to just be here with everybody. I'm gonna hop right into it. I'm going to begin with an archival document that didn't make it into the Life Studies chapbook, but that I hope, speaks in some respect to the scope and animating questions of this class on ethnic studies and the social imagination, and especially to how poetry has existed institutionally in and with ethnic studies. Here are a few words from a statement June Jordan shared with English department colleagues and students at SUNY Stony Brook in April 1978. Yes, students may earn regular academic credit for a poetry workshop, but no, students must not suppose that such a semester's work is the honest equivalent of a semester in chemistry, or even a semester spent in the acquisition of traditional terms and perspectives for literary criticism. This is one of several examples June Jordan gives to explain how poetry is regarded in the academy and in the world off campus. Poetry here is not unique. It forms a part of a complex of life studies that also includes Black literature, women's studies, and children's literature, which Jordan describes in this 1978 statement as the teaching of herself. Like these life studies, she is subject to institutional disregard. Like these life studies, she's an engine for changing the meaning of power. She says, poetry workshops, these figure as optional, if not frivolous, possibilities for commitment on and off campus. Black literature is a second-rate body of knowledge about second-class people. Women's studies obviously do not deserve dedicated hard work, or else their contents would have been incorporated into required courses long ago. Children's literature, what's that? The study of unimportant stories written for unimportant people whose young lives are not important, are non-productive. Oops. She goes on. These prevailing hateful evaluations of what I commonly undertake to teach mean that I repeatedly meet with pedagogical problems that I must try to meet and to overcome as though my very life depended on such victory. In fact, it does. My very life depends upon the elimination of values that demean, erase who I am, who I may become. Such a transformation as I need to foster and to abet inside and outside the academy requires power, and an integral part of the problem that is my life, as well as an integral part of the problem that I face as a teacher, is this. Without power, I must nevertheless seek to accomplish an essential change in the meaning of power, so that my own values can survive and flourish and constantly expand the compass of their influence, so that I can live without death There is life in poetry workshops, in Black literature, women's studies, children's literature. These are life studies. In the guidelines for poetry criticism from Jordan's SUNY Stony Brook workshops, echoed later in the guidelines for poetry for the people workshops, we see that poetry is the medium of utmost precision. Therefore, poetry is a medium for telling the truth. Education must be about the truth, Jordan tells graduating Black and Puerto Rican middle schoolers in a church in Ocean Hill, Brownsville in 1968, as she describes life studies. Education must be about the truth, or we should forget about it. She urges students to remember the truth of your absolute value as a human life. Education must be about the truth, and Jordan began her teaching career as a teacher of poetry in the mid-1960s, working with the Academy of American Poets, who sent her, in her words, into New York City public schools, serving every age level and income level and racial mix or racial segregation. She also taught Saturday classes in a program called The Voice of the Children, administered through the Teachers and Writers Collaborative and co-created by Jordan and a white public school teacher, Terry Bush. Jordan and Bush designed these Saturday workshops with a certain looseness, as Jordan explains in a speech she delivered at the Tri-State Poetry Festival in 1969. The speech is called Children and the Hungering For. The open structure of the workshops were part of, quote, a deliberate attempt to emphasize the separation between Saturdays and school, which is a place where children, in quotes, fail. The affirmative nature of poetry and first-person writing made Jordan's advocacy for young poets a counterforce to public schools' denigration of their lives, and especially the lives of the Black and Puerto Rican students she taught in her weekend workshops and then at City College, where she had joined the Sikh and English departments in the late 1960s. The materials in the Life Studies chapbook, Jordan's essays and poetry, and Jordan's archives more broadly brim with efforts to make education about the truth. They brim with efforts to affirm human life in acts of human communication. Among the things I find interesting about archival research, in addition to the beautiful letters and brainstorms and notes to self, and among all kinds of glimpses of intimacy and gifts of creativity and intellect, are the signs of everyday work of making movement within an institution. Like this, a page from a page in the SUNY Stony Brook course catalog, I think from 1984. A course catalog may not seem like the most exciting genre of document, but what did it take to make a reality of English 374, Section 1, The Art of Black English? A course Jordan writes about in her essay, Nobody Means More to Me Than You and the Future Life of Willie Jordan. A course that was a section of literature in English and its relations to other disciplines, the other section of the course being Psyches of Man and God in the Bible. Thinking about these public-facing practical documents, there's also a letter reprinted in Life Studies from the Voice of the Children workshop. It's for visitors and adult friends of the children. Among other things, it instructs adults not to look over the shoulder of the children while they're writing, because creative expression of oneself requires a modicum of privacy. Most of the instructions in this letter have to do with preventing adults from interfering in children's creative expression. This is consistent with a broader understanding of poetry as a practice of self-determination. Still, again and again, Jordan emphasizes that saying I means existing in relation. Poetry is, as she shares in a 1970 speech to school librarians, and I'm quoting here, the multiplication of relationships that start from me and mine and I. And it is the metaphor that is the marrow, particular sensation of an only life trying to reach out, trying to touch, trying to understand whoever and whatever exists beyond the realm of me, mine, and I. Poetry is a mode of communication and apprehension and analysis, a way of trying to understand. Poetry's simultaneous potential to be a medium of communication and self-affirmation is part of its pedagogical value. I'll return to that SUNY Stony Brook statement in which Jordan asks this of a poetry workshop. Is it possible to persuade young people that what they have to say is valuable, that what they feel, that what they truly see is valuable, is worth of the painstaking effort to be precise, to exactly express themselves so that an unmistakable voice emerges from their work? Is it possible to induce a cooperative as against a competitive environment within the workshop such that the deeply personal and singular work of a young poet can mesh with palpable social consequence that will not ridicule or vilify or discourage that tender bravery from its development? Can all of us in a poetry workshop effectively witness the justice, the intelligent self-interest that will mean generous and respectful attention to the output of other students so that your own, later venturing forth, can assume a similar social safety? I've been fixed on this idea of tender bravery, of poetry as a place and a language that can give sanctuary to the development of tender bravery. I think a lot about sanctuary when reading Jordan's work, whether I'm looking at public addresses, essays, or poems, especially those that center living room. It's there in the effort to try to make Saturdays take place in the classroom, and in the speech to school librarians where Jordan shares that she, quote, thinks of the library as a sanctuary from the spectacle and as a place where you keep records of human experience humanly defined, life worded into ideas living people can use. People belong in such a sanctuary, she says. Bring them in. I want to close with a passage from that statement to the English department faculty and students that I've been reading from. This passage is a celebration of life-affirming, tenuous, mutual attention mediated by poetry. And I wonder what it meant to the students and faculty who heard it and what happened after they heard it. There was a moment last spring here at Stony Brook that I will remember all my life. When outside, when through the wide open windows, you saw the trees flaring green and the sun, and you heard the easy, rough shouts of students running around. But inside the one room of our gathering, there was a palpable and intense, solemn attention to one word and one line of one poem written by one student. And I looked up at the faces of my fellow workshop participants and I thought, my God, it is happening. This caring, this cooperative, absolutely serious attention to each other, this true listening to the word, the would-be voice of another human being. And I found it beautiful and loving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Talia and Conor, for those beautiful presentations and for really, I think, grounding us as we enter having a conversation with one another. So this is how it's going to work. The students in the class read life studies and generated a set of questions about the text in response. And I think a lot of the questions will also resonate with some of the things that you brought up in your presentations as well. So there might be some reiteration, and there's nothing not useful about that. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say, ask them, and also ask them to, and then we'll also save some time for the audience to ask questions. So I think I start with this question from Jessica Yu. Sorry, I'm looking for my window. Relating the kind of thinking about the history of ethnic studies struggles and how they resonate, how this history that June Jordan is part of, particularly the kind of history of struggles within the CUNY institution, like how they stay with us now. So I'll just read the question that she asked. Those of us in Maryam's class this semester considered the political work that birthed ethnic studies in the university. Firstly, that it came out of student activism, but also that it's the result of compromise from an initially more radical demand for third world studies that maybe troubles the project. June Jordan studies seems to demand more than what we do now in the university. Could you share your thoughts on what an embrace of life studies within the university could look like today, whether in pedagogical decisions or through student demands and activism? And that's the question. So let's start there. And Jess, feel free to elaborate if you wish.
Talia, would you like to get us started, or is this something coming up for you?
Yeah, thank you. Sure, just some early words coming up. Thank you so much, Jess, for that question. I think it's a stretch. It's my mind is stretching, trying to imagine what life studies in the university as it exists now might look like, and I think. I think your question asked about pedagogical decisions and student demands and activism. So maybe I can address the pedagogical decisions part. It strikes me as important to leave a lot of room for students, a lot of room for them to bring into to classrooms what matters to them. And I guess I find myself thinking about what common points of entry exist in students' experiences in universities as they exist right now. I think about things like, freshman writing classes, which seem to kind of waver between models of everything is an argument and everything is a conversation. And I don't know how much room for life studies, we make in that argumentative model. So as you can see, I'm chewing on this a lot. Conor, let me turn it over to you. Maybe you have a more concrete way to approach this.
Oh, I'm thinking alongside you, and I just want to name huge gratitude and respect to the questions that folks in the class had developed beforehand, and also my heart is brimming from all of the beaming sentiments that are in the chat as well, and I hope that people are really feeling seen and held in us thinking alongside June Jordan today. Life studies, I love how expansive it is, and I love that it's a call that is what you could maybe call a non-reformist demand. So it requires revolutionary change to bring life studies into the university, or to bring life studies into a K through 12 classroom. And thinking about how June and many of the other teachers at the City College of New York who were in this SEEK program were thinking about educational reforms that could be non-reformist. And so, her call for urban studies, environmental studies, poetics, the way that she would bring into a concern for learning into, as Talia had mentioned, bringing Saturdays into the classroom, or thinking about taking very rigorously student composition that emerges when students are occupying campus buildings. There's a way that she brings in the need for utility of studies, that it can't just be bemusedly thinking about something at a distance, but that there are real stakes to it. It's literally the stakes of our lives, and in particular, the lives of Black and Brown youth, who she was trying to foreground as the absolute necessity when thinking about educational change. I'm also thinking about all of the different kinds of life studies and militant study that were happening in different movements that were really activating in the time of Jordan teaching in the late 60s into the 70s and 80s, thinking about groups like the Young Lords. These were teenagers, median ages 16 to 21, who were looking at the rate of tuberculosis in lead paint, who were looking at the conditions of hospitals, the work of groups like the Third World Women's Alliance or Red Stockings, who were taking healthcare and a community responsive and a sort of learning about your body kind of approach to healthcare in their workshops that they did, as well as in their newspaper. And maybe just one more point, thinking about people who were teaching alongside June, like Toni Cade Bambara. She I think it's important for us to really center the work of these Black feminists in creating Black studies. Toni Cade Bambara had this essay called "Realizing the Dream of a Black University," which she could have published possibly in the Evergreen Review, but she actually decided to publish in the campus newspaper at City College, in which she gives a blueprint saying, listen, we have all of these different kinds of obstacles to credentials, pedigrees that allow someone to come into a classroom to teach. We need to do away with all of that. We have all of these people who have various kinds of experiential knowledge or various kinds of knowledge that isn't recognized by the university. We need to bring them in. And so, one of the ways that Talia had mentioned earlier, thinking about people being engines for changing the meaning of power, or I think it was Kendall or Irene talking about, we need to become community machines, not in a kind of robotic way, but like we need to figure out how to harness the incredibly expansive energy that we already have to transform these spaces of learning, but to also not give them up. Instead of fleeing the university, figure out how to stay rooted and how to transform them as spaces and potential new horizons of what we can do with each other. That might have been a bit wayward, and I would be really curious to be able to bring in more folks' voices into the room at any time as well.
If anybody wants to echo anything from that point, please go ahead and just ask a question in the chat, and we're happy to draw on that. In the meantime, I'm going to I feel like there are a few student questions that really resonate well with what we're talking about and that we can continue kind of thinking with. And particularly this kind of thinking about the leveling of the individual with the community among children and what that work can do. And what lessons we can learn from that. Martina Perez had asked this question. Yes, thinking about Kendall's question as you referenced, how do you create an environment that does not introduce this competitive spirit as June Jordan was so invested in? And what is it that we can learn? To use Kendall's particular quote, like, is there a way to apply the same idea to an academic setting, and what the possible benefits could be for emphasizing more group cohesion rather than competition, especially at a place like Yale? And again, I think there's some way that you've answered this already, but I think let's think with that set of questions as well. And there's a couple more questions we want to draw on.
I can jump in. That's okay with you, Connor?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking when I heard that question, which is a really wonderful question, of two things. One, I think I mentioned to Maryam and Connor a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about one of my first experiences in a workshop where somebody said, okay, do you want the butter knife or the steak knife, in terms of, dissecting, cutting up work. And I thought, I don't want any knives here. Oh my goodness. But I think it's important to acknowledge that in thinking about the spaces of workshop or just academic spaces more generally, that there is a way, and Jordan actually addresses this in that speech from to SUNY faculty and students that I shared, in which when people think of rigor, they think of a kind of destructiveness. And I see in, all of the materials for the poetry for the people workshops and these earlier workshops, essentially in which rigor does not mean destructiveness, where being serious does not mean that. And so much of that, I think, comes through collaboration. And the archives are full of manuscripts. June Jordan's archive is full of manuscripts for anthologies of student work that she was trying to prepare. And she, in her life, published anthologies, but she worked really hard to find ways to kind of not only have students collaborate in class, but to collaborate on getting their words kind of out, circulating into the world. And to kind of trace back to that first question, I think one of the ways I think about having life studies in the university now has to do with, also facing outward, also thinking about how meaningful it is for all of us to circulate our words outside of, the spaces that we're usually in. Maybe those are kind of spaces of sanctuary to develop them in collaboration, but that there's something really meaningful. Conor, do you want to add anything here?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm seeing a really important question in the chat, and I really want to foreground. There is a part of what June Jordan's legacy, in particular in supporting these student strikes, that I think it's important for us to be absolutely maintaining as a focus in our present, and that she was looking at the students' demands and their demands for a school of third world studies that would teach Black and Puerto Rican, Caribbean, Asian studies. That she says very clearly, we demand Black teachers of Black studies. And I think that that's a really important intervention and reminder that she's making, that Black students and Puerto Rican students and Black and Indigenous and students of colors in the present can't necessarily rely on trusting in a learning setting the ideas or the facilitation of learning about their histories from someone who hasn't experienced them. I think from my experience as someone who is mixed Puerto Rican and Irish, and who was a student at the City College of New York, learning about June Jordan when I was an undergraduate there, working with someone named Jane Marcus, who was a radical feminist scholar there, who pointed me to looking at the history of City College, looking at these amazing people who were teaching in coalition with each other. I saw, and this is back in 2006 when I was studying at City College, I saw that this was a history that for me as a CUNY student, as in particular a student of the Puerto Rican diaspora, that I needed to figure out why I kept seeing that Black and Puerto Rican was continually used in the same sentence. So Black and Puerto Rican coalitions, Black and Puerto Rican student unions. And I think that there's a bit of a different way that we distinguish community today. And so something that I'm really wanting to think alongside Jordan and others from this time up to our present moment is how people can ensure that they're in coalition with each other, even if they're not identical. And I think that while Jordan was saying, affirming, we want Black teachers of Black students, I think she was also taking really seriously this insisting upon community that Black and Puerto Rican students, and in general students of colors, were making of the CUNY system, that movements were making at the time in coalitions. And I'm really honored that as part of this residency and continuing onward in the events through January, that there will be a really amazing lineup that I'm hoping that Dion and others who are tuning in will be able to join and contribute to. And I'll just be sharing it in the chat in case anyone may be interested. But yeah, I really appreciate that question.
Yeah, and I wanted to address that question too. I'd invited Conor and Talia as editors of the chapbook at the CUNY Graduate Center, which does lead to this bigger question of like institutional access and, you know, who comes to institutions and who is who is admitted into these institutional spaces to do this kind of work. My hope was for my students to kind of access this work and to see what possibilities there might be for them down the road to do similar work if that is something of interest to them. Not at all meant to exclude, but it is something that I have been thinking of and I do wish to address it publicly, so thank you for asking. And speaking of editorial, I mean, I think let me just bring a few questions about that into the space. Give me a second here, and then I think we should transition maybe into the workshop bit. But again, please do ask questions in the chat. So Irena asks, how do you envision this chapbook series, Living in the World, as an extension of the communal learning that took place at CUNY in the June Jordan and M years? That's Irena's quote. And also Larissa Martinez asks, as a space of sanctuary, well, let me kind of abridge Larissa's question. How is poetry let's see here. I will copy and paste this part of the question in here. I'm wondering if Conor and Talia can speak a little more about the process of putting together this chapbook and how it forged the relationship between themselves and June Jordan, and between themselves and those around them. How has poetry affected and aided their own efforts in building community? And maybe let me also bring in another question from Cassidy Arrington, which is kind of to the side of this, but important. She says, I suppose my only question from June Jordan after reading this work is, having thoroughly understood the entrails of the slum of poverty and the impoverished through observation, is there a way to emerge from it unscathed? Should one do so? Are they a model for how to aid communities at large if such a model exists? So a few different questions, but I'll put them all out for consideration. And
Wow.
please feel free to elaborate on anything in the chat as well.
Talia, do you want to jump in? Is there something that's coming to mind?
I'm trying to catch up on everything that's here in the chat and that was just shared. So not at the moment.
I can think of a couple of things. And I'm so grateful for these questions. It is extremely heartening that y'all are looking so intently into these lessons from June Jordan, and something that is with a heavy heart. I'm wanting to say that this chapbook, Life Studies, is currently it's out of stock in press distributors, and the Lost and Found project out of the CUNY Graduate Center should be printing more, but we are definitely in a situation that is honestly, the tune is very familiar, that a lot of works of Black and Third World and scholars of colors and community organizing scholars, the work that they produce may not stay in print very long. So, but that's something that we're working on getting to circulate again. But how can this chapbook be used? I think some of the snippets that y'all got to hear today, thinking about how these different speeches and pieces of writing can be prompts for you envisioning and creating forms of life studies in your lives, be it in classrooms or in non-formal learning spaces. In terms of the process of creating it, we're in our pandemic time right now, but I would really encourage, when the Schlesinger Library archives are open again, for people to try to make a trip. It's in the Cambridge, Massachusetts area. And Jordan's archives are there alongside Adrienne Rich's, the two other folks who I wrote about in my dissertation and have been learning alongside for a while, Audre Lorde and Toni Cade Bambara. Their works are at Spelman College Archives. But June Jordan, she has a voluminous archive, as Talia had shared, and it was amazing to go there twice to spend time sifting through this huge mountain of different kinds of archival materials, and to then figure out how to pare it down into one book. What we wanted to do was to figure out how to show that a speech, a poem, a statement to a board of higher education, that all of these were examples of her pedagogy. So looking really broadly at what that means. And I think one more thing to consider is that as we were working on this, I was seeing that Jordan's poems in particular, and also her essays, were continuing to be animated in these different social upheavals that have been particularly spiking in the last several years. And looking at her poem on police violence that was circulated at many events, Black Lives Matter and anti-policing events, her poem about my rights, which was circulated in many international women's strikes events. So there's ways that she continues to be activated in all of these different movements at the time, in our time, outside of the university and also inside of it. Maybe one last thing is that thinking about I'm remembering the specific wording, emerging unscathed from slums. I think that's an incredibly important question. And I'm hearing that Jordan was thinking about the contradiction of this concentrated immiseration that happens in slums and that happens in overcrowded, underfunded schools, but that maybe she was also taking a little bit of inspiration from Karl Marx, that capitalism produces its own gravediggers, and particularly by concentrating people together. And so if people are concentrated together, then there's a propensity for them to figure out how to really harness their collective energy. And so it's not just, kind of deterministic, terrible things that happen to people who are forced into these terrible living conditions and learning conditions, but that's also potentially the very site where people can think about how to counteract them. So I feel like Jordan can help us think through that in our present moment.
Thank you all for that conversation, all these beautiful thoughts and strands. There have been a lot of questions in the chat, and maybe what I'll do is I will save the chat and send them to our facilitators. And so maybe if we can transition to the workshop component of the event right now, I will take us there. So this is a little bit of an abridged version. Usually when I run the class, we spend the last 20 minutes or so writing. And I give the students a prompt and they write for 5 minutes and then we regroup and kind of talk about the process of writing through the prompt. So I will share it with you and I will put it on my screen and share. In the spirit of June Jordan envisioning a School of Life Studies, what's an example of a class that would be offered? In the spirit of June Jordan, envision a School of Life Studies. What's an example of a class that would be offered? Who would teach? Who would learn? What would learning feel like? I will give 5 minutes to answer this prompt. So everybody who wishes to tune in, please feel free to spend time writing. I'll set a timer and I'll let you know when we're going to regroup and come together and talk about it. Great. Yes, and I will drop it into the chat. I'm sorry. So you have about a minute to wrap up whatever thoughts are coming to mind. Okay, wrap up whatever thought you're on. And maybe let's come together. My initial thought had been to put us in breakout rooms and discuss, but for the sake of time, I wonder if we can just invite the room to share either in the chat or through conversation if you feel compelled. Feel free to unmute your mic and share. So yeah, go ahead, Irene.
Hello, I migrated upstairs. I actually, funnily enough, I had been talking to a professor this morning about like text you would put on like your ideal syllabus. And since when I took Professor Daphne Brooks's The Black Radical Tradition my first year, it was this like very, very transformative class for me. And we read James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry, and then listened to the Nina Simone, and like all three of them together. And like, I think it really shaped the way that I think about like classes and like thinking about authors like living at the same time and like being in conversation with each other. And ever since then, I've had this idea for something that I've like colloquially referred to as like Black DS. So like Yale offers this program called Directed Studies that like does like your traditional like core, like it's 3 classes in philosophy, history, and literature. And I was like, what if you did like had a similar like out thing, like was like philosophy, history, and literature, but like from the perspective of like Black studies. So like for philosophy, you're doing like Fanon and like critique of Black reason and like I don't know where you would put Du Bois, but you put Du Bois in there somewhere. But like thinking about like that and like life studies as this thing that like is, and I think I jotted down in the free writing like also like classes in like food sovereignty and like farmers and healers. I've been reading this book about like medicinal plants. But yeah, I've just been thinking about like what it, like life studies as like the ultimate like DS, like but like not DS. DS at its most useful, which is of course counterproductive to what it actually is doing. But yeah.
Alexandria Cruz says, I envision a course on Indigenous rights movements grounded in environmental justice. Oftentimes when we talk about environmental justice in academic settings, Indigenous voices are omitted in favor of non-Indigenous authors, historians, scientists who write on the subject. I'd love to meet and learn from elders and their comrades in the fight directly, their words, their experiences, and how they have continued their legacy. I imagine this class is taught at the site of struggle, at sites of struggle on the lands where battles have been fought, so we can connect with the time and space of its energy. I want to walk on the ground of revolutionaries that history has omitted to follow their paths and keep their legacy alive. Thank you for that beautiful response. Pinderwelia, class on US migration taught by grandparents, or maybe they'd be guest lecturers. Maddie Nguyen also says, I envision the involvement of grandparents and elders in teaching. Sonia Adams, collective literacies course focus on teaching development reading and or writing for diverse learners, high school graduates, English as a second language learner, GED graduates, returning adult students. A couple of other great bullet points there. Others should feel free to chime in either audibly or in the chat. Kendall, I was imagining a med school class about Black women's health taught by Black women who are or have been doctors.
I'm curious if anyone spent some time writing about what life studies would feel like. If anyone wanted to jump on the mic to share about that.
I did.
Or learn it. Yeah, please go ahead.
So it's Romy Smith, and I decided to write in poem form, really inspired by Jordan. So the title is A Room in the School of Life Studies in the Spirit of Judy Jordan. Windows are open, the door is closed, and everyone has a key, which is a pen that they dip into daydreams and etch on the wet map of the world that hasn't dried yet.
I love that. A wet map of the world that hasn't dried yet. I'm curious if anyone else who had put your thought in the chat, if you'd like to jump on. It would be really great to hear different voices in the room. This is a beautiful gathering.
Yes, the microphone is open.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for this fantastic and really warm gathering. I don't know if you can hear me. So I was just thinking about Jordan's, so my name's Moses. I was just thinking about Jordan's training in architecture and how that needs the high school in particular. And I was thinking about this sort of intent to go against the university as a building in particular, the high school as a building, and to think of it as something more than a building, something different, a space that that is perhaps not antagonistic to social interactions and various kinds of coming together. And then I was also thinking about as a space that could recognize knowing that isn't constrained by qualifications, and which is what June Jordan was talking about, and which reminds me of the idea of a general strike, which is evident in Du Bois and others. And I was really thinking about how that might be understood in the space of learning. So how do you combine those? The idea of thinking spatially, but also knowing and learning with those considerations coming together, the general strike, and how that all could coalesce into learning.
Thank you for sharing. It's beautiful. Please feel free to share. Oh, go ahead, Isaac, please.
In terms of how you would feel, also thank y'all for everybody for the thoughts prior to, both like in the chat and out loud. Thank you for this prompt. But I think in terms of like how it would feel, it's funny, I was talking to my friend talking about like when you get off a Zoom call, it kind of feels like your serotonin level would go high and you like have a really deep sigh of relief. And I think that like, at least for me, remembering my favorite classes, that similar feeling is how I felt walking into a room when I began that class. Because I was like, okay, whatever else I have and whatever else going on before or after is just kind of gone for about 40 minutes if it's high school, 50 minutes to an hour or whatever if it's class here. So I definitely think it would feel like that in terms of just like, okay, whatever is going on right now in school, in work, in the world, I don't really have to think about it. And so it's just kind of a sigh of relief for the whole however many minutes you're in that space.
I really appreciate that point. I wonder, even when we were envisioning, thinking about asking you all to reflect on life studies, exactly as Isaac is bringing in, how do we do this at an imposed distance? or at a physically safe distance. Is there a way that, for example, people sharing thoughts in the chat, does June Jordan give us the invitation for us to try to lean towards each other in some of the ways that Talia shared about these workshop spaces, even if we are at a distance, even if we are grids in a box? Yeah, I'm curious if people wanted to reflect on that, or also all of these really great points in the chat. It'd be great to hear from more folks in the group.
I'd like to speak. So my name is Brianna, and I found out about this through the Graduate Center. I go to Hunter, and I was feeling really down today. So then I was like, oh, let me just see what this is about. And I was really glad that I joined, because as what I got from this and thinking about life studies, I started to think about things in my own life. And what I'm struggling with right now is, during quarantine, we don't have a lot of space. Like, I share my room with my two little sisters, and we're all on our Zoom calls at the same time. So it's very stressful. So I was thinking about maybe a class on learning how to make boundaries, because I find that I have a very hard time, like for instance, like telling my mom, like, I have homework right now, I can't do this, that, and the third. I can't do this for you right now. And so I was thinking about things like that, because I feel that if I don't have boundaries within my family, when I go out into the world, I don't have boundaries within my classmates. I don't have boundaries within what I'll let people say to me, within my friends, within my relationships, and so on and so forth. And I watched something else earlier, and it was I think a TED Talk, and I don't remember the name of it, but she was explaining that like, for like generational curses, and how for so long you're kind of like stepped on by your mother and your sister and your brother and things like that, and they don't even realize that they're doing it. So talking about like letting that little girl in, and what did she want? Like, my dreams were stepped on, so now I realize that now I can kind of get them back, in a sense.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Thinking about how much Jordan took kids seriously, and including, these were some of the recommendations to adults who would visit the Voice of the Children workshops that she was giving on the weekends in the late 60s into 70s. She would say, give the kids space, don't interrupt them, don't look over their shoulder. Also, giving adults more of a sense about how to give children these boundaries, or young adults these boundaries. I really appreciate you bringing that in. Our entire country needs a class on boundaries. My gosh, so true, Dion. I'm curious what else came up for folks. I would really love to get to hear. I know we've got a little bit of time left, but yeah, folks, please feel comfy to share.
Hi, my name is Darla. And Brianna, I just have to say, I wasn't going to speak, but I have to say that I focused on thinking about what learning would feel like. And I'm going to read it verbatim. I really wrote this. I wrote, learning would feel like the privacy my mother was too afraid to give me. And I have to say that this is connected to the strike on campuses for life studies, because it's about assimilation, right? It's about learning. For me anyway, it was about learning or being taught how to operate under surveillance and how to operate in ways that would keep me alive. But it would oftentimes be, very intrusive on my privacy, which is absolutely, I agreed that, we need the privacy in order to be able to write and to think and to be in connection, in relation to ourselves and our innermost hopes. So I really just want to say that is a goal now for me, to think about how I can incorporate and pursue and encourage learning to feel like this space of privacy that perhaps my mother was too afraid to give me. Thank you.
Thank you, Darla.
We can take one more if somebody would like to share.
I'm curious if anyone who had shared some thoughts in the chat would want to jump on the mic to be able to share a little bit more at length.
I'm willing to share if no one else is coming up. I wrote in the chat that I'm actually working on a class with the topic title Black Lives Matter, and I teach a lot of ethnic studies and literature classes that kind of center on oppression and resistance. And I just got Alicia Garza's new book, The Purpose of Power, and it starts with her reference to her original post on Facebook as a love letter to Black people. And I've just been thinking about the importance of oppression and resistance, but that when that's the only framework, that can also be really kind of brutalizing for students, as important as it is. And June Jordan was certainly going to be central in the course. And I'm also thinking about how to make our community central in the course. I teach at Humboldt State University, which is a very white dominant community, but we actually have a really vibrant NAACP chapter. So in thinking about this theme, I'm trying to imagine it as something that would include people from the community, and the projects that students do would be applicable to the community and have an audience of not just, something they turn into the teacher and close their eyes, but something that has an audience either in our local community or whatever their own local community is. So I'm still in the process of thinking about that, and looking forward to watching the video of this presentation and rethinking it with those lenses.
Thank you so much for sharing, Christina. We're right at time, a little bit past it. I shared, just for the sake of time, a couple of forthcoming events. Tomorrow, CUNY, Black and Puerto Rican Third World Feminist Studies Now, with Joanna Fernandez, Carmen Quinard, Benny Canan, with Spanish interpretation. And then also on Tuesday, a reading with poets Asiya Wadud and Brandon Shimoda, which is also part of this class. So I think we've heard so many beautiful responses, and I think it's good to land there. I do just kind of want to address in closing again, when I had organized this event, just kind of to respond to the earlier question, I had invited Conor and Talia as editors of this chapbook. And in retrospect, in this kind of public opening, I include as well Black voices alongside them to expand the focus beyond the chapbook. And that is a shortcoming on my part. So thank you to those who've put pressure on me to answer that question. Thank you everybody who's joined us here today. I'm really grateful for your co-presence. We're, even though we facilitate, this is very horizontal for us. It's never meant to convey any sense of ownership. So please take these materials and do with them as you wish, and continue building on June Jordan's work. It's certainly necessary. So thank you all. Students, let's reconvene in our usual classroom Zoom space, and we'll debrief. Everybody else, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. It was great to see y'all.
Save the chat, by the way.
Yeah, and save that chat. All this brilliance. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Maryam, do you want to stop the live stream?
Yes, I will stop the live stream. Thank you, everyone.
Maryam, are we going to our regular link?
Yeah,
Okay.
students will go into, well, maybe if you're all still here, well, let's go to the regular Zoom link. I will end the meeting now.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Wait, oh, Maryam, did you send us the?
Oh, yeah, I will send that to you.
Oh, cool. It just if you want for us to join, but whatever's clever.
It's actually in that Google Doc, the planning doc. Sorry.
Word. Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Thanks, everyone. This was so wonderful.
Thank you again, Rachel.
We'll be sending around like the recording and everything, and we can reconvene by email. But this was so wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks again. See you soon. And see you all in a
Bye.
little bit.
All right. See you in a bit.